We have function, but what about form? It's time to start adding some detail to this custom radio-controlled 69 Chevelle. Hello everyone and welcome back. The 125th scale Chevelle SS is back on the bench once again. Huge thanks to all of the love on the previous installment in the series. I was really happy to see this car finally fully functional and able to be driven around, proving that all of that time spent designing these custom components to make this Revell plastic model kit drivable was successfully executed. With a well-functioning and highly detailed foundation, it's time to start working on the rest of the car, making it look as lifelike as possible. That shouldn't be too difficult to do, as Revell has done a great job with this model kit, including a great selection of highly detailed parts that so far have fit together very well. It'll almost be like building any other static model kit at this point, though there will be a few modifications necessary, such as making any necessary changes to allow this 396 cubic inch big block V8 to be able to fit under the hood around these functional RC components, as well as modifying the trunk to allow easy access to the battery. As always, if you'd like to catch up on any of the previous videos in the series, I'll be sure to include a link to the video playlist below in the description. But without any further introductions, let's dive right in and start making this tiny Chevelle look more like the real thing. I'm going to be starting out with the engine. As you may recall in the previous video, I made any necessary modifications to the block to fit around this functional N20 size motor. Obviously, there's some compromise here, as is to be expected with any RC conversion. But with the bulk of the modifications now out of the way, I can start to make this hunk of plastic look more like a big block V8. The first step was to have a look at the included instructions and locate all of the parts that will be used. Some I'll be cutting off the parts tree and gluing into place right now, while others I'll leave on the tree to make painting easier later on, especially smaller parts like the distributor and coil. At this stage, I wanted to do any necessary test fitting, trimming, and sanding, then also glue together some of the pieces like the heads to the block prior to painting, since all of that will get sprayed orange. Another thing I did, which is kind of hard to see here, was I sanded down one side of the oil filter while it's still on the parts tree. I have just enough room to install the oil filter, even with that N20 motor in place, but I did need to sand down one side to allow it to fit. I also had to sand the front of the water pump. I won't be able to include all of the engine components on the front due to the servo position. Really though, as I'm progressing with this project, I've realized that the servo position is pretty much perfect, being right up against the radiator as far forward as it can go without requiring any serious modifications there, and then I just needed to make some minor modifications to the front of the engine and leave a few parts off. Obviously, there's always going to be some sacrifice with an RC conversion, but really I think this servo ended up being positioned quite well, all things considered. I also test fit the battery, as in the 125th scale Delco battery for the car, not the functional RC 1S LiPo battery I'm using for this project. I haven't really modified anything in this area, so no issues there. But with everything looking good, it's time to connect each part I wanted to paint to my super high-tech holding tools and blast some spray paint. These are just your standard hardware store Rust-Oleum brand spray cans, nothing fancy being used at this stage. While that was drying, I did any necessary final preparation work on the interior parts and remaining under the hood parts before painting all of those as well. Before applying the paint though, it's important to thoroughly wash everything first to remove any oils or dust that may be present, which can result in poor paint adhesion or a less desirable appearance. Naturally, some of the smaller components for the engine were painted by hand. With all the parts for the engine having been painted by this point, and it was, well, at least dry enough, I went ahead and assembled it pretty much just as instructed. Again, a few modifications were necessary here and there, but for everything not on the very front or the bottom, it could just be put together as normal. I had to do some trimming on the alternator belt and the upper radiator hose, but with that done, the engine's going to fit right in place on top of that functional RC motor. Once again, the fit and finish of all the parts in this kit is pretty good. The paint definitely made the fitment on some of those smaller parts a bit snug, but it all went together just as it should, and here's a look at the engine in place on the chassis. Definitely a cool looking engine that's going to add some nice detail under the hood. Very happy with how this turned out and is looking so far. Maybe one day I'll get a bit more intricate with the detailing, such as adding some spark plug wires, but I think I'll just leave it at this for now. Obviously, I did go ahead and put the body on, not just to see how it would look, but also I was a little concerned about there being enough clearance between the top of that air cleaner and the hood. It almost looked like the engine might be sitting up a little higher than it's supposed to, of course as a result of having to leave enough room for that functional RC motor, but as you can see here, that hood sits down where it's supposed to, so no issues there thankfully. I added a couple of additional details, including painting the washer fluid reservoir white, and then I also added a couple decals to the engine. More under the hood detailing will be happening later on in this build, but for now, it's already looking great. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but I'm really impressed by the included decal sheet. A great selection of decals for many intricate details, including some that go under the hood, which is always great to see. I've always found the decals included in Revell kits to be high quality and easy to apply, with these certainly being no exception. At this point, I didn't want to mess with any of the other parts that I painted, as some of those parts for the engine were slightly tacky, so as tempting as it can be to keep rushing forward, I resisted that urge and really tried to take my time with this project, as it's been turning out great so far, so I really didn't want to compromise the appearance, especially at this stage as it's getting closer to completion. With this in mind, I'm sort of switching gears now and focusing on the body. I started out in the rear with these filler panels that go around the taillights and this rear bumper piece. They needed to be sanded and lined up correctly to try and get the best possible fit and finish. I'm certainly not the best model car builder out there, but I do try and get things lined up and fitting together as well as I can. Sometimes it can take quite a bit of time and be kind of tedious to get everything lined up as precisely as possible, but it really will pay off in the end with a nicer looking finished model. Just like on a full-size vehicle, you want your panel gaps and panel alignment to be as consistent and smooth as possible. Of course, the situation back here is slightly complicated by the fact that the trunk will be functional. As you may recall in the previous video, I decided to go ahead and cut out this trunk piece so I can have easy access to the battery in the rear without having to take the whole body off. I think it's going to work out great, and the further I get with this project, I'm more and more glad that I chose to do this, and it's something I may consider doing on more projects moving forward. Of course, though, this does introduce the question of how exactly the trunk is going to be mounted to the rest of the body. I was considering using magnets, but I decided to go ahead and design some small but still easy to 3D print hinges that I could glue into place, which would allow the trunk to be opened up somewhat like the real thing. I went through a couple of design iterations, and it's something I can probably make even better in the future, but you'll notice I went with a 2-hinge design, unlike what you would tend to see on most real trunk hinges. The reason for this is I want the trunk to snugly fit against the rest of the body. I don't want there to be a huge gap between the back edge of the trunk and the filler panel that sits between the trunk and the rear window. I want the trunk to basically butt right up against the rest of the body, as having any sort of gap here is not going to look good. Even just having a few millimeters of clearance so the trunk could hinge more conventionally would look bad. It would be like over an inch of panel gap if it was a real full-size car. Notice how once it was glued into place, this 2-hinge design allows for the trunk to not only be lifted up as you would expect, but also fit snugly against the rest of the body. That's exactly how I want it to fit. Of course, I'd also like these hinges to be as relatively low profile and non-intrusive into the trunk space as possible. I want to have plenty of room for the battery, wiring, and maybe some lead weights that I'll be adding to fine-tune the height of the rear suspension if necessary. I'm pretty satisfied with this setup. The only thing I'll have to watch out for is the trunk can't open super wide, but this will be good enough and allow plenty of room to change the battery. With that really being the only modification to the body that's necessary, I continued on by prepping it for paint just as normal. This includes test fitting all of the pieces to ensure proper fitment, and sanding away any imperfections, such as flash or mold lines, which will result in a better looking finished model. Another thing I wanted to do to improve the appearance was deepen the panel gaps, something you've seen me do on many projects prior. I thought on this body in particular, the panel lines seemed kind of shallow, so I just used a hobby knife and a pick tool to carefully make them deeper and slightly wider, which will make them more visible once everything gets primed and painted later on. We've already established from the previous test drive that there shouldn't be any major wheel rubbing issues, but I went ahead and did some sanding around the inside of the wheel arches, making the material in these sections thinner just in case. The more room these wheels have to steer and move up and down with the suspension, the better. This plastic body is much thicker than what the sheet metal would be adjusted for scale, so oftentimes, as you'll see with other projects that I've showcased here on the channel, it can be helpful to remove some material from these areas. Once that was complete, I wanted to glue the hood hinges and this upper core support and hood latch piece into place. One of the things I wanted to think about at this stage, before I move on to painting, is ensuring that both the trunk and the hood will remain closed while driving. Obviously, I don't want them to rattle around or even fall off while driving over bumps, so what I decided to do with the hood was use a couple of tiny rare earth magnets. These appear to be a couple millimeters in diameter, and there's a really good spot for them right here where the hood latch would be on the real car. Obviously, one gets glued to the body, the other to the hood, and it's as simple as that to help keep the hood secured. It's subtle in appearance, but provides enough strength to help keep it in place. Now, it might not be a bad idea to add an additional couple magnets to the backside of the hood, as that can still kind of rattle around, though once the firewall is installed, that might not be as much of an issue. But I decided to keep it with just the set of magnets on the front, as it's not like this car is really going to be driven that hard, so I think what I have currently is going to be sufficient. I don't anticipate that little bit of hood rattle to be an issue or even really noticeable while driving. As for the trunk, I'm less concerned about it rattling around and opening up, as the hinges do have some friction, so it should hold its position just fine, again, especially with this car not going to be driven hard. The only thing I added to the rear for the trunk was this little piece of styrene, which will make sure that the side of the deck lid closest to the front of the vehicle won't be able to sit lower than the rest of the body surrounding it. There was just one final thing to do before applying the primer, and that's test fitting the windows. Again, I just sanded away any rough edges, such as where they were attached to the parts tree, and ensure that they fit nicely into place, which they do. It took some time, but everything is looking and fitting properly, so I can move on to getting each of these parts thoroughly washed and then apply some primer. Of course, that primer will not only help with paint adhesion, but it also helps identify any areas on the body that might still need some work. So far, this project is really coming together nicely, and I don't want to screw anything up at this stage, so I'm going to allow that primer plenty of time to dry, along with some of the other items that I painted earlier. So this is where I'm going to pause on this project for right now. Before too long, it'll be time to get that body painted, as well as put together the interior, all of which will be showcased in the next video. I want to give that paint and primer plenty of time to dry, especially since I have had a bit of a streak of paint issues on some of these more recent projects, so hopefully we'll finally have an issue-free paint job here with the Chevelle. But as always, if you want to stay up to date on not only this project, but everything else we have going up here on the channel, please feel free to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button, as there's plenty more super scale RC projects to showcase. As always, I have to give a huge thanks to all of our awesome Patreon supporters and channel members here on YouTube. Your continued support is greatly appreciated and helps make these videos possible. Also, if you're interested in doing a similar project to what you see here, all of the STL files for these custom RC components designed specifically for this Revell plastic model kit are posted over on our Patreon, ready for you to 3D print and build something similar to what I have here. But that's all I've got for today's video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.